Hello everyone, Kurt over here, and welcome back to another episode from Hope Federal Labs. Today we're going to be talking about some training mechanisms that we can utilize to help ourselves out later on within the manuscript, and it all revolves around using the dagger and how we can utilize that to translate to the sword. And essentially, this is going to be a big part about, I think, the observation of the tools of the time, and I hope that this kind of helps out. Again, this is a part right here. It's much more about mechanics, and I'm introducing it now, even though we have so much more about from all the dagger masters that we have to go through. I'm introducing it now because I think that as people go through this, to make this much more of the holistic system that it may or may not have been, which I think it is. It is how we utilize a practice of one arms into others. So with that being the case here, I'm just going to showcase this and kind of show you how I see this all connecting together and how we can build a daily practice that regardless of what you have in your hand, we may be able to glean other technique concepts. So with that being the case, let's get into it. Okay, so big thing on this right here is we've talked about essentially two ways of gripping the dagger. I know that they have all these other ones that go for here, but I'm talking about you have two options. It's dagger forward or dagger backwards, right? And if you recall in one of the videos, yes, this might be the thing that I'm trying to do with a blow, but if I can't do that, this might be something. I'll be honest with you, in sparring, actually recently we're doing some dagger stuff here, 5th Master Concepts, and I'm getting tied up, and I, as the aggressor, slammed this, not this one, we've padded daggers for this, but slammed the rondelle into the person's ribs, and it was enough to break their grip. That's padded with foam. So you can imagine what a metal rondelle here, one that's got teeth and everything else this way, or maybe like a groove like this, you can imagine what it does to the body. But anyway, I digress at that point because ultimately here, what we're talking about is the balance of this right here, essentially, by learning how to come in with such, like we've talked about with certain movements, this right here is going to lend itself to other things. Now, before we get too far into this right here, I know there's another video out there about dagger strikes, and I'll be linking that in this as well, is that essentially this, if how I'm holding this, there's very little, doesn't pull anywhere, right? The dagger is basically set right here. It's stabilized around the wrist. It's very connected to my hand. Now, this is an important thing here because essentially when we start talking about different types of strikes and everything else, we can utilize this with another tool to be able to develop other strikes. So essentially, when I hold a sword, and this is a Regenier replica to the Albion Mercenary, it's my favorite type of sword. If I hold it straight up and down this way, it again, if I decide to push forward with this, the blade is going to fall. And that's because this thing has its own point of balance. Now this is very important here because essentially, and of course we're not holding a sword like this, but by me holding it like this, right, essentially it's relatively straight, but as I start extending the arm, the sword is going to fall forward. It's physics, right? We can choose this, we can choose to use this right here. How this is a way of being able to train using a dagger and how to utilize the sword in one hand, okay? So that's a big part about this because essentially when we start talking about the striking mechanism of a dagger, one thing that I caution people on is I don't think we do this. Because if I'm going to do this right here, if I miss, this goes right into my leg. I think always Fiore's always angled in some form or fashion, and that is because he understands, or the people at the time understood, that in a heightened situation, people are going to freak out, and I might completely miss. And if I am going straight down into this, I just stab myself into the leg. Okay? And those are very, very important pieces right there that I think we have to understand. So what I think dagger strikes are, like I've said before, coming across this way. And again, you can notice right here, I can keep this thing relatively. And if I push forward this right here, this doesn't shift very much. Same thing with this. This doesn't really shift very much, like we saw with the sword. So when I'm doing stuff like this, and I'm going back and forth with a here, here, you notice here, the dagger is clear of my body. And just like you have later masters, like third master, that contend with a revezzo shot, or a backhand shot, if you will, for other manuscripts, by learning to do this, all I do is I change that angle a little bit, and essentially you have dagger strikes. So right there is all upper quarter dagger strikes. Striking, 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 right? Very, very basic. Now, if I add a sword to this, again, because of how this thing is if I push forward, the shape is going to, the blade is going to go forward. Essentially, again, this goes back to the concept that I believe that all I'm doing here, everything I just did right there, is just me doing posta longa, using posta longa in some form or fashion to do this. And of course, if I do that with my hand, nothing's going to shift. I add a dagger, there's things we have to contend with. This is why we have turns of the feet and turns of the wrist. When you put another object in your hand, i.e. the sword, when I hold this sword in one hand, well, again, pushing out, it changes. So essentially, just like with a dagger strike, when I'm doing this right here, and I can't use this to swing in here because I'll bust my light, but I have this. Anytime I utilize this, and I'm thinking about stabbing with this, right? Well, because this thing will shift forward, we're just getting the arc of the sword. And just like how we don't want to do this to ourselves with the dagger and stab ourselves, we want to keep this thing in motion. Because this essentially allows us to keep the sword into action. So again, because this is going to go forward, and because with the dagger, nothing happens, right? But the moment I put something that's got weight right here, sword falls. The strikes of the dagger, in my opinion, and how I teach it, the strikes of the dagger and playing with this, essentially are teaching the strikes of the sword. And all you're doing is making the same shape of the body, but because the tool in the hand is different, I strike with the blade versus I strike with the stab. So if I was controlling this completely, I can maintain that dagger shot, but it really wants to pull and pull and pull and pull and move. And because I've trained also this concept about turning off lines so I don't stab myself, right? What that allows me to do is to allow the sword to turn. To mezzovolta, so I can turn back and forth with a cut. Okay. We'll talk more about that as we get closer. Mezzovolta to me is just, it's anatomy. I don't think it has anything to do with about play on the sword. And yet at the same time it's constant, but at the end, I think most, if not all of Fiore's concepts are anatomical and less about lines. Because at the end of the day, it becomes a little more complex. So that's the first variant. And again, if I'm utilizing the dagger like this from up, and again, we're talking about utilizing this type of low line here. Popping it in, up, up. So using this low area, coming low into the groin. Again, we're talking about utilizing, because the sword has got its own balance, it does it for us. So just as a daily practice right here, again, you don't have to do this with anything in your hand, to be honest with you. You have one right here, you can simulate it. That right there translates to the dagger, as it translates to the sword. And that right there is just something right here that I see as something for people to kind of practice and play with as we're continuing down this exploration with the sword and the dagger to build up different type of training mechanisms. So you can see with this how in practicing one set of footwork motions, handwork motions, structured motions, we can change that depending on what we have in our hand. The dagger basically weighs next to nothing it obviously has a weight to it, but it doesn't have the same type of shifting that something that's longer in the hand is going to have. And essentially, it does make our hand heavier, which makes it kind of extend out to do certain things. But with the sword, it does shift around. And essentially all we have to do is, by having this thing that weighs differently in our hand, we change up what it is that we are able to do or not to do. Again, this is just a very, very a daily practicing that I do for myself. A lot of the stuff I do nowadays when I'm doing my own thing here is I work off of the posture structures of Abbracciare, and I apply the turns of the feet and the shifting and extension in between all of those. And I believe that that's how the totality of Fiore system really works, is that you have these things right here that once you put your hands on a different object, your gravity is now a part of this thing's, is now been added to. And because the sword, the dagger, the spear, the axe, eventually the horse, because they all have different weights and variables to them, it's going to have a different effect. You're going to see different motions that come out because by using the same mechanics that he lists out there. So again, this is just a basic daily practice thing that I like to do for myself. I think it's beneficial. I think it's helpful. And I wanted to share it with people because, again, when it comes down to the different types of arms of the time, I think that we can kind of look at and see that there's emphasis in different areas and places, and for good reason, because there's an arms race going on, right? You have different types of, 100 Years' War is going on in one area. There's constant crusades. So there's a rise of material that's happening right there. It's not a fun time. And arms and armor are essentially always being adjusted to. So, and if the thing is with that, the one thing that does not adjust, well, that's us. And what we do is, if we work with structures with different materials, then essentially what we do becomes different by virtue of practice. So anyway, with that being the case here, just wanted to drop that here. Please, if you have any thoughts on this, drop me a line right there. Let me know what you're thinking on this whole thing. What are your practices? Tell me what you think about it all. And again, please share this with a friend out there that may be interested in this, or maybe they've known this right here. Love to hear thoughts. If you have any information in regards to medieval training mechanisms, right now I'm focusing a lot on a book called, it's by Phoebus, which is a French author around Chateaufoy, which deals a lot with in regards to hunting. And I also reading about how that details to warfare. So if you have any information in regards to that, or thoughts and considerations, please drop it down below. Love to hear what you have to say out there. If you're new to the channel, thank you so much for coming into this, and thank you for giving this channel a chance. If you've liked this, hit the like button. Let me know what you're thinking out there, and share with a friend in your own groups out there. Love to hear what people have to say. So with that being the case here, as always, everyone, please stay safe, train well, and fight on. I'll see you all soon.